I thought today we would start off, since everybody is sitting in on this and we're really going to deal with the issues in total, to really kind of backtrack a long way and in a way sort of start from the beginning. And that's begin by establishing what our goals are, let's say, at this point in time, and how we are meeting those goals at this point in time, or how we should or can meet those goals. And I thought this way we would throw out attitudes that we may have talked about through the years, and we'll see how close we are to where we were and how many new attitudes we might have. So let's just sort of start it that way. What do you see as our major goal in this school at this point in time, or one of them? Let's list some goals and take a look at them.
To be accredited.
To be accredited? If there are disagreements, we can say to not be accredited. How about philosophically? I mean, what are the goals? What are we trying to accomplish? What do you want to accomplish for you?
Does accreditation affect like the versatility of the way our studios work? Because most schools are structured vertically, and SCI-Arc can't move horizontally. So does accreditation affect that in any way?
To my knowledge, no. I mean, in other words, if you read what was put up there and the performance criteria for accreditation, each school sets up their own unique position. So we start from that as a premise, that we have no holds barred at the moment. So if we had nothing that was barring us, what would you want the school to be? What it is, or what?
Former creative community.
Pardon?
Former creative community.
A creative community?
One that changes over time.
Okay, a dynamic. Pardon? Okay, to educate designers, architects.
Maybe expand that a little bit to problem solving, which is a little bit more, well,
Okay.
maybe it goes.
Let's put problem solving down as
Also put down confident.
How about awareness of the needs of all levels of people?
responsive to all, is that what you're saying, or aware of when you say the needs, you mean both student and faculty community, everybody, or are you talking students?
I'm talking about communities of all levels.
All levels. Okay. How do you want to word it then, Arnie?
An awareness to
A people responsive community? I don't know. All right, response to the individual.
on all levels, not just on certain levels.
Okay, on all levels. We'll have to get into that more definitively as we go.
How about providing enough technical proficiency, so you're not going to just list to an office?
Okay, so besides the design-oriented problem solving, you also want technical proficiency. Jim, you record what this is up here? I really didn't. I should have read for John. This is not really hidden. Okay. Is that it? No?
Experimentation.
And anything specific for as designers? Or
As a criteria for, of the school, to be very experimental in the orientation.
design or social?
Look at this in all of that.
About responsive to the changes in our field also, and aware of it. New materials, new ways of looking at things.
So what I was referring to is being dynamic, not depending on the criteria of the past, but accepting new innovations.
Is this something like a response to professional practice?
Yeah, that and just like new, like the solar, the whole solar push, and new changes in the field that directly affect us.
State of the art and beyond. State of the art and beyond.
Right. So, but it's still responsiveness, right? You want to be responsive to that.
Also, it seems like there's a major transition between what we do in school and what actually goes on in the real world. And I don't know how to put that, how to write that down, but I don't know whether it seems like before we graduate, we're made aware of the kinds of things that we're going to face.
Do you want to just be aware, or do you want elements within the program that make that bridge more known to you?
I was lost when I went, and I'm still lost. You know, just a little bit I did, but it's like I had no understanding at all of what was going on out there. You know, and it was maybe a way that we could at least be made aware of it, even if we didn't understand it, but at least we could expect to have some expectation of what we were getting into when we leave school. Because there is a very major difference. I don't know how to put it in words.
What do you want to call it? Linkage to the profession, something like that? Is that what you want? Or?
I guess it's a preparation for professional practice or whatever, but it just doesn't seem to be happening.
Some kind of work study.
Well, that's different now. Now we can, there's work study. There's one that will just give information passing within the school. There's the other where you would work as, as an intern in some form. I mean, these are different elements. Are we talking about all of those as a goal, or are we talking about just the first as the goal, or all three? What?
I would think, my own stuff, I would think all of them, but just
Okay.
the initial shock that you go through when leaving school and going to work, there must be some way that we can prepare for what's going to happen.
How about curricular flexibility?
Curricular flexibility? That was one of our original
What was that?
curricular flexibility.
Some sort of consciousness raising towards columns that are not towards educational environment, towards architectural schools, how, I guess, ongoing growth there, and what's happening in the world.
I'm reading it. We've got
Just, some sort of awareness program, I think, that to help make people aware of lot of problems that they don't really.
You mean total social problems or architectural ones? I'm not sure whether you mean.
It would have to. I would have to say it would have to be open. I mean, generally it would be in terms of the architecture related to the architectural field, but obviously
To the whole world, to all the world problems and everything else that goes on.
What you asked for last time, responsiveness individuals to do that?
No, that would be, this one would really be awareness of, I guess, society and all the
I
elements
mean,
of
it would
society about us.
basically be, as Jared was saying, like the whole environmental thing. I mean, for a billion years, nobody ever really thought about it, but it was, something that some people were kind of on the cutting edge of and had been working on way before the general society got to. I mean, that type of thing where we begin to get exposed to things that maybe aren't,
But you're talking also the political social consciousness, aren't
yeah,
you?
in general. It would,
Or not, I mean,
yeah, I would say it would have to come on all levels.
Social awareness?
Don, would you call it an interdisciplinary kind of approach where you would learn about what's going on historically and politically and a total picture of the forces in the world and how it continues on architecture?
Personally, I would think it would be, in general, fairly design, architecture field oriented, but I think there would be occasions and times when it would, get into a problem right here. I don't think you can label it one or the other. I don't think it's that clear.
Maybe we'll remember about social and environmental responsibility rather than just awareness.
That's a good way to put it.
What was the responsibility?
Are there any ways in which you see SCI-Arc being different from any other school or any other university or any other institution? Totally. I mean, what we should be doing.
Lack of bureaucracy, flexibility.
We want a continued lack of bureaucracy.
I'd rather be an individual than a digit.
Small groups, community.
Huh?
About community decision making.
Yeah. I'd like to see it change from the student-faculty separation to make governing by total.
As we originally stated.
But last week it seemed like that. It sounded like that. It never was stated, so I don't know why. Maybe say that.
A greater opportunity for teachers to evaluate students and individual evaluation on a total way of seeing the student from the teacher's point of view and vice versa. I don't know, let's see, how could I more individual evaluation? Or perhaps with one faculty person to a student in an evaluating way, that you know where you're going or if you're heading in the right direction or how you should be redirected or
Maybe it goes along with the idea of the original catalog like a mentor. A person you can relate to one-to-one as well as a student, group to one individual instructor.
Well, one is a mentor system, one would be an increased counseling system. I mean, which
I don't think it exactly is counseling, and that sounds,
well, one way it's spread out among many, in other ways it's spread out among few.
I meant more of a one-to-one relationship where there's someone who has an opportunity to see a progression.
We didn't see, okay, well, let's put it back down again then. I guess call it the mentor-student relationship.
We're going to go over these and kind of get a feeling from everyone and how they react to all these.
Well, then I thought we'd take a look and see how well we're doing with these and how we should change them, and what we should do. And then, of course, I thought we'd go into some of the things that were in this report, but you'll find that they're going to be good overlaps, so it may be simpler than I thought. Okay.
Responsiveness and responsibility of relating to the natural biosphere.
Is that this environmental responsibility?
I don't know. I think there's a fundamental one before that. Environmental sort of indicates nebulous. This
Responsible biosphere?
yes, the natural biosphere.
You want to include the psychosphere there?
Anything else? Anyone else?
Yeah, I would have to go back to our original concept of the community as maintaining and building facilities on a more definite commitment than we've been in the past.
What do you mean by that?
Well,
You're talking about physical plant?
yeah.
Physical plant.
You're talking about creative community and clean community, is that right?
Well, but it's, I mean, creative community where we could have, all sorts of people turning out things that, could be put up and exhibited for the benefit of the rest of the community. The other, I think, is, more nitty-gritty of who sweeps the floor and gets things done.
About upgrading physical plant.
We can both be physical maintenance and social maintenance. I think physical maintenance is more basic than creative.
Under existing practice or technical proficiency, I don't know, I guess there'd be a relationship there. I think the idea that what Ray said of a work-study program might be again, something to school. I don't know how to really put it, but the idea of finding out more about practice by actually doing some work in it, study, a student internship.
People that are really interested in internship right now, so I interject, there's a intern architect development program now being developed at AIA. And anybody who goes to the CCIA meeting, there's going to be a discussion of that, I think, at Thursday at 11 o'clock by Elmer Botzai, who's the vice president of AIA. And he's been sort of heading up their move with INCOG, who is the registration board. And if anybody who's interested, maybe you should go to that meeting, the intern architect development. They're developing an internship program where basically all graduating architects will join this program. They'll pay fees to become an intern, and they'll have one mentor, sort of a mentor that is an architect that they'll work with, and then, or that they'll keep in touch with, and there's another architect who they work for, and those people are supposed to be supplied by the internship board, and it'll be set up like a state registration board. It kind of. That's at the CCIA conference in San Diego, on the 16th on Thursday.
That'll be handled through the AIA and then set up in each city individually, right? With each chapter setting up their own intern board.
Yeah, the state organization is going to have some say in California.
Plus then Botzai at the federal, they're doing it nationwide though, aren't
Yeah,
they?
it's national. They've got a pilot program that's starting, I think, this semester, preschool.
Getting into those goals, specifically, how whoever threw the goal out as far as SCI-Arc responsive to individuals, how is it not responsive to individuals?
Well, let's hold it just for a minute until we get all these out, and then I think what we could do is talk to each of the issues individually, and then we'll, then we'll go at it that way. Just see if are there any other issues that one wants their goals?
Sort of flexibility in the program. I mean,
Well, that's curricular flexibility. Is that what you mean?
how about respect for your neighbor?
That's
The golden rule.
I think we should be educating people who are capable of creating innovative roles for themselves within the society rather than just fitting into the existing system.
The other question then is designer oriented. I don't really see anything. Wouldn't that be clarifiable?
Well, let's wait until we run. We'll run down them one by one, and then I think.
It seems that we're lacking something. We ought to be talking about maybe the architectural environment or the rather than design orientation, understanding of the built environment and the non-built environment. And also maybe something that says some kind of cultural orientation, which seems to be somewhat lacking.
The social environmental responsibility, that doesn't cover it for you.
And I was thinking more of the cultural.
internal or in terms of how their
Cultural understanding, shares for social understanding.
Well, it's called social, cultural, and environmental responsibility. But then we went by Terry's. That didn't go down. It was too many words, so you couldn't write it across.
You can just put 3 words left. Role innovators.
Some kind of community education sort of thing.
Pardon?
Some kind of community education sort of thing.
Educating the community?
Yeah, to let people know there's architects in this world.
All right. Community. Yeah, I guess.
You know, it's video text and a couple of rooms.
Community education, or the education of the community beyond ourselves. I guess that's what they call extended education or something.
Extended community education?
Yeah.
Education in
For the community.
We're talking about the community at large or
Yes.
public, say public education, okay. I'd also like to see us start expanding into some of the other interdisciplines, getting more into planning, more into landscaping, maybe even getting into the arts, getting out of just pure architecture.
Expanding disciplines.
Expanding disciplines. Expanding disciplines.
I'd like to see us get a bigger blackboard.
It's slow, right?
Anything else?
I think maybe along with designer-oriented problem solving and technical proficiency, there should be something about a design sensitivity. As
Aesthetics?
well, that's a hard way to put it. But I think by looking around here, that there are certain aspects that are obviously not too sensitively handled. So I'm talking at sort of on an individual level, there are little details. I'm not picking, but I think that there could be an upgrading of design consciousness, how's that?
I don't know, that's what I had tried before, under social and environmental, but it seemed to have gotten transferred somewhat. Responsibility, and, there was like an individual consciousness of your environment.
Good. I think individual consciousness is pretty good.
All right.
John, you could have. I didn't understand this.
Because this is relating to our community you're talking about, right? It's like
Okay, why don't we take a look and see, are there any others, or should we just take a look and see how we're meeting these at this point in time and where you feel that we aren't and what changes we should start to think about? So why don't we take them one by one and talk about wherever they're relevant to that kind of discussion. I don't know, the accreditation one, which is sort of the general overall, I think we can kind of, I mean, it would just be sort of like, I mean, the only thing we can talk about there is what we're dealing with today is heading in for that direction. The only thing I could say is whether there's any question of anybody who doesn't see that as a goal nor cares to deal with that as a goal. I mean, I guess that's always the really.
What are the trade-offs? I mean,
right now we don't know any trade-offs, so we assume there are none. Well, we won't know until we're visited on this advisory if there are any trade-offs. And I think we should discuss that at that time.
What difference does it make to the students in the school whether we're accredited or not going on, or in working in the field, or in working for the...
Is there anybody who doesn't know that answer by this time? Friends, huh?
Well,
I'm happy to answer it but it's been answered so many times. But I think well, maybe let's clear it up. We got a larger number than usual. Okay. The accreditation has probably no meaning in relationship to you as far as obtaining a job somewhere in the field of architecture. It only has a meaning to you in terms of your time related to your licensing credit towards the exam. So therefore, if you're in an accredited school, you get a different evaluation than if you're from a non-accredited school towards your 8 years towards licensing. Other than that, I don't think it has any value at all.
right, student loans.
In student loans, right, excuse me.
Does it have anything to do with, say, if you wish to be graduate and work at another university?
May or may not. So far, we haven't found that to be true. But it could be true. I don't know. That would, again, depend more on the way each institution works.
One of the points there is they don't accredit an undergraduate program. What we would be getting accredited would be our 2-year master's program.
What difference,
Thanks, John.
what difference does that make in terms of, say, weeks, months, or years, accredited or not? Because you're evaluated differently.
Well, each school is evaluated differently, so it isn't exactly across the board. Normally, it's a year's difference, but it could be more depending upon.
Does that mean that 4 years are not valid unless the 6-year programs are?
6 years your first professional degree.
Right. And you're given 5 years of school credit for 6 years of school, no matter whether you're in an accredited program or a non-accredited program at this point in time. How that's differentiated, whether that 6 is made 4 and a non-accredited, I don't really know.
There's 6 months difference.
6 months?
6 months difference. You go to an accredited school for 4 years, you get 4 years of credit. If you go to a non-accredited school for 4 years, you get 3.5 years credit. The other thing that it makes possible, I guess, is maybe the ability to get grants. People get into things like grants from other institutions, organizations, foundations, and so forth.
There a change in credibility, really, that's what it amounts to. And plus the fact that I guess guys like Bill and me I don't have to keep answering the question every day. it's a, you know, because most students coming in, I mean, I get letters all the time. If I come to your school and it's not accredited, what does that mean in my life, you know? And you gotta keep sending back letters about this, and once it's over, you don't have to bother with that anymore, which would be kind of nice, for one thing. But beyond that, it has, it has value to you towards your licensing program.
Many of the kinds of grants that are available are research-oriented grants, and we haven't said anything here in the goal as to whether we want to be research-oriented. Some schools are very strongly research-oriented.
I think that along with the responsible advice here, that would be a good spot to mention research, because when Glenn mentioned that, in order to respond to it, you have to know a lot more about it than is being, you know, currently done by.
Add research or
Experimentation could go with that.
But experimentation can be within one level, or research can be at, you know, another level.
Still talking about accreditation, there's a push on now, and I know back east to make it mandatory that you come from an accredited school to become a licensed architect. I don't know whether that's going to spread out here or not. They're supposed to do that. It's going to be aware of that.
No, that's a good point too, Jerry, because that's true.
If it's just a 2-year program that's accredited, are the undergraduates available, or are they, do we get benefits of the accreditation such as student loans?
Yes, yeah, right, it's your full program is accredited, but the master's degree is the degree that's accredited. Thank you. Any other on that?
I was going to say, in a case like UCLA, their 2-year program is accredited. They don't even really have a 4-year program, is there?
Well, nothing's accredited over there.
Oh, I thought.
No, the 4-year undergraduate degree in the University of California, Los Angeles is accredited, but not the master's in architecture. Okay, well, let's go on to what our other goals are and how we're responding or not responding, and what kind of attitudes people have about that. Creative community. How do you feel we are, if you were in that area? I mean, how do you feel we are a creative community? Where are we lacking? And what kind of changes should we be making in that area?
I think we could use a fiscal, another fiscal plan to, well, at first I want to say dormitory, but that's not the right word. But I'd like to see what kind of response it would be to this kind of thing, to where you would have not a separate community, but students from SCI-Arc living, it'd probably have to be a separate, physically, for some reasons, but a separate structure for the students from SCI-Arc living, apartments, whatever, and take this and have the two of them interact with each other, just back and forth. And either, there's several variations, some of you may be familiar with the East Coast community co-ops or something. People have gone and buying these apartment houses. But I think something along those lines need to be, it'd be really community, creative community. Something along those lines can be worked out.
And that's community housing.
Yeah, right. School sponsored or something. Or school sponsored.
Not necessarily.
Well, yeah.
You know, we're into that's another whole area, and a whole finance issue. But again, if there was a desire within the community to develop a live-in community related to SCI-Arc, then of course then one would have to sit down and go through the ramifications of that, and that's okay. I mean, you know, that can be done within or without, or all kinds of ways. But
I just was curious to see what kind of response it was. Not just school, but the students who.
How many people would be interested in having a living community with a thing involved in that they would be able to live in? Interesting aspect.
There's some others, there's a couple of us just been talking, we haven't done anything. Like to.
You know, if I can interject here, one of the things
that I see and I feel I have a conflict within myself, and I saw a lot of it coming out from the board here. It's just the idea that of a school as such, which automatically sets up the boundaries of 4 years, or 3 years, or whatever it is, as opposed to and we have this push, we have a sense of time, sort of, that we have within ourselves. What I'm kind of thinking of it is where you don't have a sense of time, where you come and learn, and there isn't a class, there isn't a timeline situation, but it's sort of a, I want to say that it's like a circle. You come in and you get involved with a circle, and at some point then you leave, as opposed to at the end of 4 years you leave, or that sort of thing. And I think,
of course, we started that way, didn't we, Randy? I mean, that was the opening day started that way 3 years ago. Well, and that whole idea that there would not be any kind of real structure other than a fairly loose structure that people would work through, and there was no real time element, and there was no year separation. But that immediately was by the student community within 4 weeks asked for it to change completely. And that
Can't both coexist. I mean, you can have this going with it. You can have people like Carl and other people who come in, use the facilities a little bit, maybe come in just to have access to the library to participate in the programs. I mean,
let me put it this way: the coexistence that now that's still present, should that just continue on,
Yeah,
or are we starting from day one and trying it all over again, which is what Randy's sort of saying. But speaking for myself, I've seen us go through that process, and it never seemed to be it kept getting more and more into the structure process.
I realize.
And that isn't, and I'm just, the only thing that would ever change that would be the request in the other area where you'd have more people speaking as Don is, who want to go through in a more casual way. But the difficulty is that's, again, if we know that, then we have to manage that kind of a thing, which is different from managing a more structured thing.
Well, I'm really speaking on a personal basis here, because I have the time conflict built in myself as well, and yet in a way I wish I didn't. And Terry, I kind of think you were approaching that and what you were saying, where you were not.
Rule innovators? Not necessarily. That can be very structured. I'm sorry.
No, I didn't understand your question.
Well, in reference to what I've been talking about, your statement that you wanted on the board, was that somewhere in, what exactly did you mean by that? Because I felt what you meant was an overall without specific limits.
By role innovator, I mean, as opposed to setting up a school to educate people just to fit into the profession as it's presently structured. We're just going to more or less take over the custodial responsibilities of carrying on the profession as it is. I think that part of our responsibility has to look at how should the profession change, how are we going to educate people who can create their own innovative role in society as it appears necessary, rather than just people getting out and viewing how are they going to fit into the existing structure.
That's kind of what I'm talking about in the timelines. We ask for more technical proficiency. God knows I'm not, if I need it, if I'm going to work in the field. And yet, there's a technical school that provides that if you want that kind of an education. I don't know. Next question.
I think what Terry's saying, what Randy's saying,
are two different things. Yeah. I mean, one can be done under a structure, one can be done under a non-structure. I don't, my own, all I can respond to is what I've seen for 3 years. And if what I've seen is any indicator, and what other people who've been here for that long have seen, I would think that the general group of people that we have had so far in our school would opt for letting it be sort of laissez-faire, where there's an insistence upon that, but those who primarily want structure would be given structure, which is where I think most people's heads are. Now, that may be I may be misjudging again, and we may let this thing keep riding on up, and if there's a big show of hands for a different kind of a thing, and one really wants to go through that process again, it's all right with me.
I think part of what Randy gets into is I think we have to also get into use of the facilities. It's different from the full-time student attendant and the whole tuition schedule there, because that's all, that does always get to be a conflict of, pay $700 or something to come in and use the facilities when you're doing independent study, or just using the library and attending meetings and stuff. It seems to me what's happened is we've lost a lot of our independent study students that way. I mean, I knew Paul, that was a lot of his reason for leaving this, when he was doing so much work on his own and there weren't really the faculty here, but yet still wanted to be involved in a school community and have access to the other. It really wasn't, he couldn't, get himself to justify paying that same tuition schedule. And I think that, without acknowledging it, we don't attract people who could have input into our community unless they wanted to be full-time. The people who are involved on a part-time basis is basically because they I guess, are aware that it can happen and want to approach you privately, and it isn't something we've really ever stated.
I think the problem too about the program that we sort of started non-flexible, no organization. I think really when you get right down to it, if you want to have independent study, there has to be more organization on the part of the faculty, and they have to put in more of their time and more hassle and problems because people don't end up being there at a certain time. And I think that was also one of the reasons that it didn't really work at the beginning. And I think a rethinking of that, maybe figuring out an organization where people who do have self-study, could work in their schedules a little bit better with what is existing would help a lot.
Maybe giving block of times that are a little bit freer. I mean, right now, a lot of times, most of the available school days, most faculty members are teaching. They're either not here if they're not teaching a seminar in the mornings, or they're teaching in studio time and they really are devoted to that. And there really isn't time. You kind of always have to kind of kick your way in and out, grab when you can. A lot of times that's not been possible.
I think part of this issue of having a creative community is also encouraging a diversity of viewpoints. And maybe that should be an attitude we should take in terms of the people that we bring in, particularly amongst the faculty.
I think a diversity of viewpoints is a positive thing. However, I think there has to be some coherence as well, because I know that personally a lot of the things don't seem to where one ends, the other doesn't start. If you learn something in, say, second year or third year, that doesn't really relate to what you're going on through. So it's good to have a varied outlook on a varied faculty give you a varied outlook on the world and the field of design. But I think you also have to have a cohesiveness to it, so that varied outlook you can make some sense out of it. And it's not just a bunch of random points of view.
Well, how do you feel we fare in that area?
I think there's a very random faculty, and I think that there's problems with a unity to the entire program.
Do you think that the faculty should define that cohesiveness, or should it be the responsibility of the student to make the bridge between different points of view?
Well, I don't think there has to be a concrete bridge between different points of view, as there has to be a concrete bridge, or maybe not a bridge, but a process that you go through, instead of a random journey. I don't think that someone has to sit down and tell you how Tom Maitland is on Lottie. I think that maybe where the one's class ends and the other one starts, there should be a closer bridge there.
I think maybe something that would help also. We've always said that when you come into the school, you have, well, now we have 23 teachers. I counted, to draw from, right? 23 teachers. Well, personally, and I'm sure almost everybody else here relates to, maybe 3, the teachers at the school. And I think maybe what we need is some kind of process so that people also in individual study, as well as people who have other teachers, can go to another faculty member, and that faculty member will have some time scheduled or something, maybe an office hour, every 3 times a week, so that people that are out of his class, that want to relate to him as an instructor, can go to him and talk to him, and all of his time will be taken up with all of his students.
Give us an office, we'll have office.
You understand what I'm saying?
No,
Because I mean, like, if I want to talk to Terry, I have to catch him when he's running between classes,
Yeah.
right? If I want to talk to Ray, you're
Yeah, I
wrapping
think-
at some other student. I mean, I think that sometimes, like you and a few other people can, especially when you're fairly involved in your classes, I mean, the size of some of the classes is hard, as you today, you barely covered the amount of students that you had. So if somebody else who wasn't part of your class
Well,
wanted
that's
to
because I
catch
had to
it,
sit in on one other class and
Well,
discuss
but,
there,
that's
and then fit it in between that and this. So that's
but
that
these
day.
types of
That's
things are
not the
always
day.
happening.
That's not the day you ask for to talk to the guy on the side about an issue on, can I use something for some reason? I think it's a question of what we're really dealing with. If it's an independent study individual, that's one thing. If the person wants a certain amount of time to discuss the issue, normally that most of us, if we can't do it immediately, set it aside on the following day, or make that attempt to do that. I was just wondering how many students are constantly finding that a problem, or even are looking for that kind of a situation if you're not an independent student.
Well, I know that I've had a hard time getting credits from the instructor who's course assigned, let alone other people. And it's no fault of his own, it's just due to the numbers of people in the class.
I guess my question really is whether or not, that is what we're trying to do. That was sort of the original intent, was that all the teachers, all the faculty would be, everyone that was in the school would be able to use all the faculty as they, through their expertise.
Right.
And it's just a question of whether or not that can really work now. I think a lot of, especially the new students, they don't really know that sort of, initially it was set up so that they could go to any other faculty and talk to them about their problems, And I think maybe if the people understood that the other faculty are supposed to be partially at least responsive to your problems, that maybe that interaction would happen more often.
I think that's one of the biggest things standing in the way of the issue of the creative community.
I think we have a whole lot of resources, a pool of resources that's unimaginable in the school now. Even when we began, we did. And it's grown and grown in the last 3 years, and now it's sort of gotten to the point where there's so much information to be gotten that it's really hard to figure out which faculty has it. You know what I mean? Maybe we need of course, each faculty has a sort of a portfolio or an outline of what their expertise is, in the catalog. Maybe that isn't used enough. People are really interested in a certain field should find out what instructor to go to, and there should be some organization, of that whole entire, the possibilities of that situation.
Well, most schools seem to deal with that in terms of having a set sequence, so that as you go through the program, you are exposed to a certain set of viewpoints. And that's the way in which you come in contact. I think, the looser it is, the more chance you have that somebody's going to stick with, within one little area and not get the exposure to the resources that are available from the faculty or even from other students.
One way, I think, to get some sort of exposure is to have panel discussions, weekly sessions, by 5 instructors discussing their professional topics. So sociological, psychological, philosophical issues. They can't even discuss them among themselves.
Maybe if you got 50 onlookers, you're a little bit more objective.
Well, that would give people a chance to talk, to raise questions, and see 5 different people respond.
Could I see a show of hands how many are really suffering from this particular issue we're talking about that Jerry brought up? Well, I mean, okay, who are not able to do what they want to do in terms of either talking to various faculty members around, or not finding time in that sense. And I'm not talking about, I didn't get a crit last week or something, but I mean, on an overall, that if you want to meet somebody, you can't meet them. mean, you know, I'd like to have the office hours start at 5 o'clock and we go up and have beer and wine, and then you can talk to anybody you want to, and we'll break every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And we'll set that up, and that'll be our session. And at that time, you move around and you talk to who you want to, and we're all through with our crits and we're all through with the day, and we'll deal with those issues of this type that you're talking about. I mean, that's a simple way. You know, office hours, Jerry, I'm surprised that you. That's regressive.
Well, what I'm trying to do though is just figure out some way that it can really happen. You know? It's either that, you know, it's either where all the instructors are together, or each instructor has to figure out when he's got a free hour. You know, and post that time and say, if there are students who are interested in talking to me about, you know, such and such, then I have a free hour and I'm willing to devote some time to it.
Yeah, well, I'd rather really become a more casual kind of a thing in which we do it as, like you know, on a friendly base, you just. And you sit down and bull.
Sure. Well,
okay, but I mean, and then at least everybody's up there. If you want to enter discussions, they'll go on all the time, and I think that's personally, I would rather see it that way than start up with office hours and all that kind of stuff.
Can I ask the faculty something then? Do you get an opportunity for faculty to get to see the progression of almost all the students?
Do we?
Yes, do you
Yeah,
as a group evaluate that, or individually, or is it a casual inference?
Our evaluation periods are those, and then the interchanges that some of us have from studio to studio, coming in and sitting in crits and working back and forth, does allow those who are interested to do that. I don't feel any lack of that in our system. I'm pretty much able to see that. I don't feel that I personally know what's going on in everybody's seminar, but I don't do that purposely because I think that's sort of an infringement upon the person's seminar who's doing it. And I think if you had visitors every 5 minutes, you'd feel like somebody watching you. But as far as the studio action, I mean, I don't find any problem. I'm speaking for myself now. If I want to see what's going on, I walk around and look.
How many do you get to know the individual students and their, I know
we don't, you can't, I don't think anybody can immediately pearl within the first 6 months that a person's in school. First of all, a lot of those don't necessarily stay on. But after you're around a while, I mean, I ask questions about you, so I know if people are in agreement or not agreement. I've seen your presentations now several times. I mean, I think each of us who are interested in doing that do that. If you're not interested in doing it, I don't think others do. Should every faculty member know every student at that level throughout the program? That would be the question that you're asking.
Well, I'm asking it because it goes the other way too, when you're in the mentor system. How can a student choose someone that they would like to be a mentor until they've had an opportunity to see how they are as a teacher, or as a person? Because you don't know them enough until you've been in the school for a while. So I see there's a fault in in choosing a mentor, because you don't know who you're choosing until you've been around for a while.
Okay, well, we try I think our attempt through the system is to have everybody make a presentation through the first weeks of school, so those who are interested in knowing where each instructor's head is at least expressed that way. We tried the first day this year to have everybody introduce at least what they're going to be talking about and what they're dealing with. And then we'll probably have some panel discussions, as Bill is talking about, among faculty on certain issues that are relevant, and people are going to have to make that. And I would like to do this more social interaction thing, which would give you really the best level to know people. But that's my own personal thing. If nobody wants to do it, we don't do it that way. If everybody wants office hours, we'll do it that way. But I've been through that bit, and I don't think it really works in an architectural program. Most of the time, people don't want those office hours. I mean, I can hardly remember meeting anybody through that process. Plus, like, you have certain people who always want to be talking to you, and you have other people who never want to talk to you ever. I mean, that's the other issue. There's some who constantly are dealing with you. But if people want to talk to other people, then it's yours to get, make that act happen. And we have to devise a system for that, let's put it that way, whatever that may be. We've tried things in the school, Wednesday night dinners, these kinds of But that's usually, again, a small group that comes in at that time.
By the time you get through a year or so, you will not only experience some faculty through their classes, but also you find other students that you have a rapport with, and their recommendations also can be used. So it might be a little rocky the first semester, or maybe the first year, but certainly there's enough resources among ourselves to find out who might be a good candidate for a mentor, or something like that.
Most people didn't seem to care about that system. I mean, most people don't seem to care to constantly want to go through that process, is what we found in our first experience. Now, maybe I'm begging it again. Maybe there's a way, but a lot of people don't really get into that constantly. Maybe, maybe that kind of situation works better with, by recommending that someone like John Midian, who's a psychologist, comes on staff and deals with your personal issues, and helps you to find your way through the program, what you're about, and then makes the interconnections for you. And because they may be more psychological than they really are related to specific problems of education. I don't know. I mean, or maybe both are the same, but I'm not saying, that I'm not sure that can be handled, nor am I sure that everybody desires it in the program or where we are, but something you can think about, I think, and it's been brought up.
I'd like to address an aspect of the information sharing that was brought up, not so much in terms of the mentor system or contacting someone about teachers' relationships with a project someone would have to have for a class, but where a class or seminar generates new information, new data, sometimes you might even have already taken the class and developing a process of information, data creation, and that it could be something that the school as a whole could get involved with in making sure that as many students as possible and other faculty have access to the new things that are generated out of classes, whether that be environmental data or solar energy data or whatever it is. That there could be a place for that kind of exchange that would help everybody a little bit by making the information stretch farther.
Well, isn't there already a beginning of that in the library, Cheryl? Don't you have certain data from certain classes up there?
Yeah.
Right, but I mean, a lot of people don't know that it's there, but that's the beginning, so that do exist. Is that correct?
Oh, yeah, but people don't know most of the stuff. It'd be a long way before they ever get to that. There's plenty of stuff. And all anyone has to do is take his initiative, that's all.
Right. To go back to that thing of accessibility, I mean, I think that some of our faculty make themselves very available and others don't. And I think that maybe,
But then be specific. I mean, what everybody always talks in is generalities, and that makes it really miserable. And then I answer the question, and it gets really stupid.
I mean, if I would, I'd have to throw out probably Eric Moss, Tom Main, Jim Stafford, generally aren't around much more than their general class time. And maybe a couple others too. Maybe, just in the future choice of faculty, that one of the things you look for is that willingness for commitment too. I don't think it's something that we can demand, as you pointed out in the past. I don't think you can demand if somebody doesn't want to be there, that they be there. I don't think it's fair to the faculty, just as you wouldn't demand it of the students. But maybe, in your future selection of faculty, that becomes part of that criteria too, their willingness to go beyond just that immediate teaching role.
Hey Don, I disagree. There's this whole discussion, there seems to be an attitude, sort of a hand-holding thing where, it's got to be set up this way so I can do everything. The whole framework of this is, like Cheryl said, initiative, your own initiative to go out and pull things. Call a teacher, say, I need you up here, or I need this information, or go to UCLA and grab something. Instead of this, I don't know, maybe it comes from going through the whole public school system, being used to everything just being right there, stuff laid in front of you constantly. There has to be a little bit more student initiative in your own particular direction, in your own draw. And it can't be geared, there's as many different directions here as there are people.
Well,
spread that over all these people.
Doug, in response, let me respond too, because yes, I agree with you, Doug, but in the past, generally, I would say that for whatever reasons, and I'm not exactly sure why, that doesn't seem to be a very strong thing. Maybe what I'd like to see is a lot more faculty led things too, that maybe they begin to do things above and beyond their studio on their own initiative too, which then begin to involve students. I mean, I think that some people, that it can be done, sometimes like Steve Selkowitz sets up his evening program, which goes a little bit beyond, that there are other projects. I think Tom Main has involved students in some of his design problems on the outside, this type of thing, that a lot more of this could be begun too, which would be an asset to the school. And, in expanding what I was saying before, maybe in the future screening of people, you find people who would be willing to go this route too, because if it isn't going to come from the students, the resources are still there and they still should be used. And maybe if it means that the faculty has to be a little bit more hand-holding, then maybe that's a route that we have to decide to go to. I don't know, I'm not going to say either way, but I think that there's a lot of potential that we can make advantage of.
I agree with you. It'd be nice if instructors did that, but the instructors who don't, I don't think should really be criticized. I mean, that's the school set up Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and apparently those other days they have their own things that they pursue, and the creativeness that they get out of their own pursuits is maybe somewhat reflected in your own classes here. And I think that's reflected in our own things. We each have our own aspects of our life, separate from the school.
Yeah, I'm just saying that as a goal, I would, like to see people.
Has to lead, and there's a time when the students have to take the initiative.
I don't see that.
There's no contradiction, I don't think.
I think that's what this meeting's about, so I don't think belabor that.
But I mean, when Ray says that nobody's asked for an art thing, doesn't mean that there isn't.
I don't mean I'm waiting for somebody to ask. I'm saying whenever we introduce anything like that, there are very few takers, and the takers leave it within a matter of 2-3 weeks. I'm happy to do all those things, but you can't do any of those without dollars to pay for it. So therefore, you've got to interrelate those two things. Pardon?
I say there's a lot of things that are almost cheap, if not free, in artwork. It's just what you use. There's so many things in the surrounding conditions that you can, create some fantastic structure or sculpture or whatever piece of artwork.
You're asking for an instructor to be involved with you, or by yourself? So.
I'm not asking.
No. I mean, are you suggesting? Yeah, if you're saying Well, anybody can go do their own free art, I don't care
It'd
about
just be an interesting condition to see if you had a setup condition where the teacher might say, well, you go with like one type of idea and the group comes up with so many different ideas, and it'd be interesting to, you know, correlate or, I don't know.
Well, Glenn, how about you speaking to that?
I think what's interesting, Ray, is that the whole purpose of this, at least in my mind, is that these goals are something we don't have, that we may want. And we're trying to find out what we do want. That's the whole purpose. And that you can't just bring up the point that, yeah, you've tried and it doesn't work. But then somebody else should take the call and say, well, let's make it work because we feel it's important.
All right, the dynamic that you're presenting as I hear it, Phil's is different than yours, or different from someone else's. Phil's talking about found materials and doing something, that's why I read his. If we're really doing an art school interaction, it's done one of two ways. Either you're inviting somebody as a guest, or you're just doing it on a guest slot, which isn't really, that's an experience, okay? The other is to really set up an alive program in the arts that relates to what we're doing, in which there's an overlap and you take and you interplay. Well, that means then a whole different kind of, you're dealing with a whole different economics. I mean, let's be realistic about what you're doing and understand what you're doing. It means more space, it means more faculty, it means more a whole different thing.
Can we set up maybe alliances with other people where you don't create the art school in here, but where we can kind of develop some sort of exchange programs for areas that might be relevant, you know, where they might want to put it into our program and we into theirs. I mean, something we really haven't done. Art Center?
But it seems to be a
Art Center
issue,
works too differently.
because you have at least, I'd say about 5 points up there that are dealing with this, bringing in more influences, community involvement, social environmental responsibility, responsible advisor. All of these really are saying, let's bring other people that are thinking in other ways here.
We haven't done that, huh?
Well, no, we are, and I think they're saying they want more of it. And so that it's an issue we have to deal with. How can we use this building more?
I see it not as an issue of bringing more people in, but you want to use those people or use those facilities, so you want to go there. Because if you have an art school, you're really on a pragmatic basis there, because most people when they study art want to learn technique only. They don't give a damn about the person's philosophy of art because they come in there hopefully strong in that, and they want a really tight shop, or they want a really tight sculpture studio. And to provide those kind of facilities, it's really beyond this point, because this is mostly in the architecture, it'd be a head trick. You're designing and you're not actually building the prototype, whereas art, it's always you're building the thing, and the head trick is often learned afterward. Well, you've tried a lot of experiments now before you want to go with it. So that it's really hard to introduce an art school into this situation because of the facilities and the money. Yeah, I think that a lot of times when we've introduced art into it, there's been a lack of generalization that is taking it from the specific piece that the person's done and taking it to the whole and applying that to a building. And that's often because there isn't enough of it to get the student to realize that there's a connection. The person is a good designer and is also a good artist, or vice versa. You know, and you can do both, but it's generally just technical skills and separate, not the head.
I think a good point is that you don't have to physically bring in these influences. Like Frank, Gary, and I were talking on how, you know, just by merely, and I have been working on it, just by merely posting the information of what's going on at the galleries and using somebody like Frank, who is fairly, you know, into the art field and knows which people are fairly serious artists and which aren't, and are getting fairly good information and posting it rather than just slapping all the galleries up there, because you don't want to go to them all. Some of them aren't really all that relevant, or you'll find that out and then you'll go to this person if you don't have one. And I think there are other ways than just simply bringing the art school here. But I think the issue still is, if you want all of these outside or more use of the school, you got to keep asking yourself, how can we use this school more? How can we bring people in, show their slides, or tell what they're doing, more panel discussions, and who's going to do this? Ray can't do it. Shelley can't do it. They're doing a lot already. It has to be, again, the individual or the faculty that are going to take up this responsibility. But I think by talking about it, we can say, bring this awareness up again, that people can start to do this, that it is a need, that there are 12 or 15 people to start with that are interested in art or other things than just architecture.
But do people here want more than one program a week again? I mean, that was, I'm just asking that because, the intent was to do a whole art and music program next year, which is really interesting. Everybody asking that at this particular point in time. Our thrust earlier was to deal with the design professions first. Our other thrusts have been to bring in those that are interrelated. At this point, we were talking about the other issues, but we're on several issues, and that's the only thing that I'm trying to clarify. If you're dealing with them, I think the night that Roland gave his presentation, you were looking at a person who was talking about, himself as the artist as well and dealing with those issues. And I don't know if anybody since that time has had anything to do with Roland in that particular area. I don't really know. He made the presentation in that way. When Glenn does his presentation, I think you get that same. I'm just telling you, I don't know how much interaction took place just there afterwards, which would mean about the same. Maybe we'd have less if it was somebody else, but we intend to do that. Our goal is, one of the things that I'd rather discuss in a way is just how do we relate all the interdisciplines, not just art, but we're talking about all the social, political, philosophical, the whole bit. I think that's a thing that the school really has to deal with as an issue, because that's a key issue. The other one is a part of the total issue. The main thing that we're doing kind of today is looking at what we're not doing, and I had hoped that we'd be looking at what are our positive as well as our negative points, and then try to see where we are in terms of what is good about the program that we want to keep and where we think we have come, and then looking at some of the infill areas, which is a different way of looking at it than just everybody so far is just talking about what should be. And quite often they're repeats of what we have done or tried. And I knew I'd be in this position always of defending where we were and what we were doing, and then do you really want to do it again kind of routine. But that shouldn't, I hate to be in this position of always being the defender anyway. I always feel like I'm sitting here by myself when I get into these. If you really want to talk about community, and most everybody else lets me field 90% of this kind of stuff. And I don't think that's particularly correct either.
It seems to me that the way the goals are set are stated, that they overlap so much, and that they're, I don't really know how to think about them, because somehow I think they have to be organized. I think they're all in a direction we all feel quite unanimous about, probably. I don't think there's much disagreement that everything up there is desirable. But I think there's a problem of how to order them and organize them in such a way that we can set about implementing them and see their connections. And I think in terms of that implementing, that will require some kind of breaking down into smaller groups to concretely decide how does something get accomplished. So if, in terms of the real problems of like resources and so forth, and time and space, and how many people are interested, and so forth, I think at this broad kind of a level, it's very difficult to speak about how it would be implemented. And it seems to me almost like a group of people who'd like to take this big set of goals and then try to organize them somehow more systematically, so that we can then break up into smaller groups that would be interested in taking a particular area of it, both faculty and student grouped together to see about how it could be become a part of the community, so it would be ongoing. Because I'm afraid we can talk like this all evening.
And for many, many weeks to come.
For many, many weeks to come, and really not get any place.
Well, we have, okay, why don't we just, can we sort out the issues? We just try to sort those out in the next 10 minutes just to see the general topic areas. I mean, how do you see it, John, as you look at the topics there? Which ones are, so far we've dealt mostly with.
The only thing that I saw that made sense to me, I mean, it seems to me like everyone's here to gain some real technical knowledge. And the evaluation of your technical curriculum is a real interesting question, where it should be improved, changed in areas. That's something I know nothing about at all, but it seems to me that's a very interesting area for faculty and students to meet and discuss on. Another area that seems real important to me is starting almost from the other end, is the personal system, which each of you is as an individual, like your knowledge of yourself as personal systems, your knowledge of yourself as a participant in a small group system, and then in a larger group system, and perhaps like a community system, how those social systems interact, because your success working as a designer is going to be directly related to your personality, your maturity, and your capacity to deal with other people, and the political, social, anthropological realities of the culture in which you're functioning. So those
there also seem to be a time sequence in that when you come in first, you're looking for the technicals, then you go toward the computer relations yourself and how you relate then to that technical skill, or is it just the other way around? Because it's a big division in school.
Or does it run parallel?
Well, they can, but that's also, you're talking about, let's say, in one sense, you can learn technical skills at any point, whether you have inner maturity or not. Okay, then you can use your inner maturity, whatever, if it's good or bad, I don't know, maybe you might say you're set in your ways after, and that's your maturity, or you learn to get out of that point. Okay, it goes, I don't know if you can go parallel in it in the whole way. It might be ideal, but you might also become very nebulous and then, searching around and not having your skills at the point when your maturity comes. See what I mean? I don't know. It's clear, but there are a lot of people here that see that working into an office, let's say, and knowing the technical skills is the prime goal, and some people want to be top designers and don't care what they do, and that's their goal. Both of them are sort of skill-oriented, and some people want to just be, know themselves and what they're driving after and don't give a damn thing design. And the three choices, one tends to be really technical, the other is sort of an immersion of the two, and the other isn't. I just like to know what the students feel.
One of the issues that raises is the fact that, maybe people coming into the school do have different goals. And should the school be set up with one program to produce a universal, person who's going to come out of that, or do we have to have a program which responds to a multiplicity of goals?
Generally, I just found that the school still operates on that level if you just seek out an instructor if you want that. And I don't know if there's agreement or not in the way that that's working.
Ray, I just had a cancellation on this Wednesday design for Frank Gary was supposed to speak when he's being called out of town. I wonder if that would be an item we could pick up on this. And also pick up on John's suggestion about breaking down the discussion group to organize that evening as a forum for a continuation, because most of us are committed to Wednesday evening here anyway.
So I would opt for that. I would, because at the rate we're going here, we're going to be a long way from what we're supposed to really be into in terms of our goal number one up there. That goal is primarily to deal with the issues of how we are doing these things, not so much as what we are all out here and what we're not doing and how those issues are met, because a lot of the desires will not really relate back to what the possibilities are. I would certainly think that we would need another really long evening on this if we're going to do this, and if we're going to break into, in the same way, I think maybe we break down into groups. Those who want to deal with the issues of curricular issues deal with curricular issues. Those who want to deal with the personal, the dynamics of the community and all of those kinds of things, maybe they deal over somewhere else. Maybe those who want to deal with how we interrelate the social aspects.
Really incorrect, because you obviously have overlapping points of view in terms of all those fields and also interests in all those fields.
Well, then you're asking for it to be sorted out. See, the problem that happens in this larger group that I find, that's why we didn't want to do it in the first place, only not because we didn't have stuff exposed or talk about what a crappy prof this guy is or this kind of stuff, was primarily that it's non-working, and there are a few people who speak, and when those people speak, you take that as speaking for everybody, and usually they're speaking for themselves. Then the issue goes into what they're interested in, which has nothing to do with the total issue, and that's where it gets so damn hard. You know, at least that's what I keep finding.
I don't know if it's invalid, though. It just takes a lot longer.
It just takes longer, right.
We're going into an evening program with it, which I think is a good idea.
Okay.
We have the time then, so that it's not necessary. I don't know if it's necessary.
Well, maybe the way to do it is we'll break down into buzz groups and come back again. At least then a certain group substantiates where they stand, and then another group or something. I don't know, but I think if we keep doing it this way, it
I think something we haven't done that maybe we ought to do is we haven't defined exactly where we are as we stand now. In other words, we haven't listed the school as it is, and then we go from there. We're just talking about other possibilities.
Right.
And I think we ought to make a definition of what the school is today and what it offers.
I agree.
And before you can ever really get into this other area.
Well, I don't call that a different area myself, but I think we are within that area doing, well, that was the intent originally. The thought of it, until everybody pulled it off into their own little gripes, which is usually what always happens, but the intent was to look at each of the items and which ones are we accomplishing within the school as it exists today, and where should we go from there, you know, where we have any voids. So then we would define the voided areas, and we'd deal with those, and then the issues that we know we're satisfied with, we've already got those down, right? So now all we're dealing with are the others. So what we tend to do today was just forget that as if we didn't, nothing existed, and then we're sort of like starting all over, which I don't think was very positive.
No, I don't think it is either. That's why maybe we really need to stick to the positive end of it.
I agree.
Before we go into buzz groups, before we really go any further.
One thing we might do is to look at each of these issues as a goal, and then perhaps we break down in smaller groups, what there'll be one person that might head a group of people, a small group of people, to keep the discussion alive. And look at each of these areas in terms of how the school is functioning now and how it can be improved upon in the future. So we can take each one of these headings as an individual group, perhaps, or as a separate group for discussion, and then let the groups come together later.
We can. I think some of those are overlapped, as John says, though. I think you could, you know, and that's what people kept doing. They talked creative community, but they'd be talking down here about the community decision-making process or something. I mean, you know, in other words, there's a lot of lapping, and the question of whether we could head them a little more definitively would
Actually,
probably
there's
be
only about 5 real headings.
Which ones do you
list
see?
of these. There's like accreditation, and then creative community, which is like half of everything that's up there is all relates to creative community, all the decision-making process, response to the biosphere, all those things.
Well,
not their response to the biosphere.
Why don't I put a letter next to these things that you see as being similar as a way of kind of sifting this out? I mean, if we say that this is A, which ones do you see as being B?
Creative community is like B, and then
Dynamic.
Information sharing, social interaction, panel discussions, diversity of viewpoints, which is down there. Upgrading the physical plant, responsiveness to individual needs, development role of innovators,
below design.
individual consciousness, right next to dynamic.
I don't see that at all. I mean, like, I think.
Well, what I'm trying to do though is, you see, like all those things relate to us and how we, you know, are, other than educating of designers, competent designers. I mean, like there's creative community
the extent of public education.
Well, I think what you're really saying, Gary, is they're all goals. If you try to
All I'm trying
block
to do
them
is
so
list them.
much.
All I'm trying to do is list them so we can look at them. Because otherwise, you know, there's too many things up there. Like that. There's only 5
Too many
that
things
are,
for what? I don't understand.
there's too many things to get anything done in this meeting.
In this meeting, okay, but there's not maybe.
So I think what we're here for is to talk basically about, you know,
This meeting's
how we're
about
educating.
over, isn't
No, maybe it is.
All I was trying to do is break it down so that instead of having 15 groups, which to get 15, there's only 5. Yeah, just break it down into.
What I'm referring to is the fact that, say, each of these were mentioned by an individual because it's a particular concern. And so I think what he wants to do is say that while some of them might overlap, maybe there should be time given to each of these. And let the groups, after they come together, after discussion takes place, decide in fact which ones overlap and which ones overlap.
I think the biggest question is you know, the creative community, you know, whether, you know, how it's working now and how it's going to work in the future. And I think that one's going to take weeks to figure out, you know, where we're at and where we want to go, you know. I think the other things, as far as like the education of sensitive, competent, technically proficient designers, you know, I mean, we can talk about that right now without getting so many different points of view that it just won't work.
Well, there's some different points of view there too, sir.
Yeah, but
On that continuum, I mean, that's the one that we're most of the time that the faculty is concerned about, how you make the program work.
that's what I really wanted to hear about. You know?
Pardon?
That's what I really wanted to hear about in this meeting, how you really felt about where the school is heading. You know, I mean, I thought that's what this meeting was going to be all about. We ended up getting off into, you know, how the community is working. It isn't. Why don't you, like, C would be the education in the sense.
Well, we were, the reason that didn't occur that way would be like saying, okay, this is what we're going to do, period, kind of a thing. And that wasn't really what it was about. The first was just to get a feeling of where, again, the questions were, what we are doing, because the continuum of the way the program works, you know, from year to year to year to year, if that be the basis under which we have now arrived, you know, if that's where we are, then we would take it on up at that level. But if there are any of these levels we have to dip back into again, then you have to decide how that's going to be incorporated or not incorporated in this process. If you follow what I'm saying. Follow. In other words, we could take it right where we are today and just decide how we're going to make it a little bit better. How do we get the continuum better? How do we get the information or the kinds of goals that, say, the accrediting board questions you about, how do you get those incorporated? Generally, we try to, whether they should be continuums, whether there should be separations, how much, what emphasis where. I mean, that's the kind of things that we get into. But then if the whole thrust, again, is to create a community, then I feel everybody who's interested in that should get over and talk about that again. I mean, I'm a little tired of that one, but I just want to, let's see it happen. I think it's a happening more than a discussion on that one. Yeah. And then, you know,
that's why I'd rather discuss things that can be discussed in the size of a group or something. But I think what we should...
the personal and the community system, as John pointed out, is one whole set of issues that have to be dealt with at a community level. And then, if you want to call it, the technical processes could also be dealt with at a level, but that would be more where the faculty knows what they want, where they think things should go on, and that could break down almost like that with involvement from students who care about that. And if primarily most of the students care about the community and the personal relationships and all of that, then they should deal on how they could see that structured better. And then later we can come back and then interrelate. But I don't think many of the people care to just sit here and hear a lot of the issues that that are amorphous in a way. I mean, you know, nobody's against having them brought up and discussed among those who want to discuss them, but I think some people
Well, I think it's the same thing though with the people that are talking. You know, the people that have brought up these points are the people that are interested in it.
I know.
And it's not by any means the rest of the school. And I think that we should, what we really got together for was to talk about issues that everyone in the school is going to be interested in.
Okay, now the thing is that we break down into smaller groups, as John suggested, which is a good suggestion. How do you, are we only into 2 systems? You were naming 5. I don't know, what are the issues?
Accreditation, creative community, education of sensitive, competent, technical, proficient designers, the social environment, social, cultural, and environmental responsibility, and a meaningful response to the natural biosphere. And then 5 would be sort of the responsibility to the state of the art and the future of the art. So I don't know if those are, does that seem kind of believe?
It seems to me that maybe what we have to do is that people take this and work it over in their mind to see if we can get it structured in some way that we could, and then try and get an agreement next time at the beginning as a group, you know, about the major areas. And then bring it down to there, because I sure want to spend some time looking at it and trying to scratch it out.
Before we do that, may I, just in case anybody didn't read, you know, what was up on the board and the performance criteria that we're dealing with, and then you can actually look at those in relationship to these because they're very similar. Let's just take one look at these 2 while you're mulling them over, because I don't know everybody's read it. And I'll start with number 5 here. The proposed processes for the development of the student's capability in problem recognition, problem formulation, and problem resolution. Now that's one set of issues that we have to deal with in terms of our whole studio and seminar process. The proposed processes for the development of the student's capabilities and critical evaluation of alternative programs of choice, especially in the areas of complex environmental or interdisciplinary endeavors. And again, this deals with some of the issues that we're talking about there. The school's program or programs to make the student responsive to the contribution and decisions that are made by other disciplines and interests. Again, I think that's one that we've talked about there. The proposed processes for the development of the student's professional awareness and sense of responsibility for social, public welfare, health, and safety concerns. Again, it overrides, you know, some of the things that we're talking about. Proposed processes for the development of the student's capabilities in the areas of communication toward enhancement of the quality and effectiveness of the voice and the role of the architectural profession in society. The extent to which the proposed programs for the development of the student's professional capabilities include minimum basic requirements for the basic practice of architecture, And then the extent to which the proposed programs reflect and balance present-day constraints, emerging trends of involvement in a wide range of disciplines and areas of knowledge, and long-range potentials for the architectural profession. Now, I don't really find that what they're asking for is much different than what we've really set up here, except I think I find it more definitive than that myself, but I don't know. At least I know here we're dealing with, some of them are curricular, and we're dealing with curricular problems, and some of them are dealing, I think, still with the personal and the community system. And
there are just as many, aren't there?
There are just as many, but I think, you know, again, they may help you to define the areas that we want to talk about. In other words, maybe some of us really want to talk about how do you develop the capability for a student in problem recognition, problem formulation, and problem resolution, and how do we do that in each studio, and how is that handled? You know, maybe that's more important to, you know, to Terry than to talk about another issue, or maybe to me. And so I'm just wondering whether, you know, you deal with those while maybe you're more concerned with how one deals in the biosphere and in those issues. I don't know. And we break them down into those, some of the areas that I think are in general, whether we again call some more mainstream in our system than not, and then how you incorporate all the other parts. I think, to me, it still gets back to an issue of what are we doing now and where are we at this point, and then how do we include the desires of other people, and how do we infill those, and how do we strengthen the program? I don't think you say, well, you start completely all over again, because I think in many of our minds we've come a long way, and I don't see any reason to begin every issue all over again. But there are issues that obviously some people aren't satisfied with, and yet those that's another whole set of problems or methods for making that work, and that's something that I think some have to work with. And I don't know whether we're still just talking two different ways, whether we have really a curricular group that's really dealing with that whole thing and what we're going to do with graduate programs and so forth, which are rather key, and then a whole group that's dealing with the community and the personal systems. And then how do we then mesh those two things totally? I don't know if they're any more than that, really. You know, maybe those are the only two issues. Do you have any, Tom? You got any thoughts?
I think that before anything's decided, that really we need to get together and look at this thing and organize it. It's just a thought. It's difficult just to. I couldn't do what you did, Jared. But I just, you really have to sit down and think it out. I mean, those things are so general. I couldn't even tell you what happened to me.
Yeah, well, all I did was just try to find some place things in there.
Then I think that along with the defining the issues, that there has to be some sort of format in terms of what we're going to discuss related to them. Otherwise, I don't think it's ever going to go accomplished. In terms of how we're going to discuss it, what are the goals, in terms of the process of all these people discussing it.
Since most students, I think, are in agreement that accreditation is the process that we want to, as a school, go through, why don't we follow the outline set down there and just discuss those issues?
Well, they're kind of both, I think. I read them as the same myself, in general. I don't.
And there, as you said, there's a lot of overlap.
I think they're pretty much overlapped. It's just a question of whether you the one thing we do have, if you took this performance criteria that we already have written down here, it's already established in a grading matrix, which you could take those two things and go through and, decide on a scale of 1 to 10, how well are we doing in each one of the areas, and then just weed it out through that in a very rather, maybe that isn't such a simple thing either, because you'll have everybody having slightly different value judgment on it.
I wonder if that's really true, that the ultimate goal is to get accredited. I mean, because personally, I don't feel that should be the ultimate goal of what we're doing.
Well, it was sort of tacit in that there wasn't any negative discussion.
Well, it seems to me that there's, some other issues which may preclude the notion of our fitting into some of the parameters of being accredited, which may override the importance of getting accreditation at this point. I think we should look at it after we've more or less defined what do we want to be, what should our program be, how are we going to satisfy our needs and goals as a group.
Well, now you turned it right back. Yeah, somebody, I don't know how we're gonna do it. Who's got an idea, who knows how to do it? What's the format?
I'd like to know how many people are aware of this. I was not aware of it.
It's on the board up there. It was pinned up last week and it was announced.
I think, maybe the way to do it is to take what's there, and if there's a group of people, a small group would be interested in taking that and trying to organize the structure, as John suggested, and draw out what seem to be, the most, specific issues related to our program.
All right, well, let's do that. Who wants to join Cherry in that group?
I don't have the time on Wednesday to do it all. That's the problem.
Can we talk about it, a little while right after this is over?
I've got a seminar to teach tonight, so I can't do it.
Well, maybe if individuals could work on it, and then bring it back up Wednesday, and take the first part to try and see if we can clarify a grid, and then Kurt's got it.
Why don't, if every individual does it, we're right back. Is that what you said, have everybody do it?
So I don't think every individual would, but I think maybe those people have a feeling for it.
Those who want to do it, let's do the next half hour. A tighter group move in and we'll sort them on out. And we'll be ready for Wednesday. Because I don't want to drag it on. I mean, because what we're really after here is developing an education development plan if we keep on just dragging it on and separating it out whenever we get there. So let's see if a group of a half a dozen of us can sort that out, or whoever wants to stay. See what we can do. If we can't do it fairly quickly, it'll just it'll have to be done in another all meeting.
categories. So an awful lot of this stuff seems to be the school community and the cultural within the school itself. And a whole other area was the professional technical development in terms of role innovators, and then that seems simpler to me than relating to what they have there. Although I think we kind of the same place.
Let's go back to the original question in terms of what this thing's going to be used for. What's this whole output? Can you comment here? What is the output of this whole discussion going to relate to?
To develop an education development plan, which states where you are, where you intend to go, and do you have the resources to do it. I mean, that's really no more than that. And so if you are introducing elements of the, new elements, then how are you going to accomplish them? And how will they be done? That's really all there is about it. And then all they're doing is throwing down a few guidelines that we're just using for guidelines. They're not going to actually necessarily relate only to these, but I mean, it makes it a lot easier to give us a framework that makes a little bit of sense, I think, to work within as we go into this thing. Because here they're kind of looking out for the student, they're looking out for the prof, they're looking out for the whole process. They want to make sure the student has some say in this whole thing. In a normal institution, a lot of this is done just because architectural programs in a normal university doesn't have the right to make their own choices of where they're going and what they're doing, and that the institution overrides what goes on. And so therefore, sometimes this is used just to get the administration to be more supportive of the program. We don't have that problem. And because we don't have that problem, we therefore have a wider open set of issues, and that's also, it makes it a little more difficult because we're dealing with this whole other aspect of how you make the best community happen outside of a normal university framework. And I mean, that's really our challenge. And that's what our school is how it primarily is different from other schools. So that does get back then to some of these issues that are, that are really programmatic and how you put them in. And other issues are really how does the community get better? And I'm sure, yes, there's an overlap, but we can come at it from two different directions and then try to intermesh them. Because I'm afraid usually the community issues will override the other issues, and you can't, and we have to come up with the other issues and then show how the community is stronger through the process. And hopefully the community will get stronger by involving themselves in this set of issues.
Well, it seems as though the reason is to set up to basically produce some sort of a cohesive direction, but it has a specific purpose for NAB, related to accreditation, that it does make sense to basically deal with as direct as ways possible as their own set of guidelines. Since I mean I'm not asking this. I'm not saying.
Didn't the school have direction before they asked us if we had direction? Of course.
No, we're talking about the format.
But isn't the first part of all of this just telling them what we've done?
What we've done.
Is that the first thing that we have to address is, I'm here for the first year and someone else is here for 3 years and I'm getting this out of it and you're getting out of it and what you've tried to teach is not working.
Mm-hmm.
But basically, these are the things we tried, this is working. Isn't that the first thing that we have to
Of course, that's why I said I think you start
before we get into wanting an art class or something like that.
Right, and those are additives, and then you'll say if those are that key to the whole thing, then you show how those are done. No, I think that would, if we were doing this as we originally stated as a faculty, the first thing as a faculty we probably would have done with student input would have been, let's take a look at where we are right now and where do we feel there's some weaknesses, and then how are we going to implement this from further, and then how are we going to make the graduate program stronger as we start to move up the line. That's where our thrust would be, at least that's where mine would be. The student input then would be, how do you make that possible? Then, since we wanted to deal with it at all levels, we thought, well, okay, let's go one meeting at least open in which we see some of the issues and you hear the issues, but now we're trying to bring them back again because they get somewhat amorphous, and I think all those issues are good. They should be dealt with. But I don't think everybody has to deal with every one of those issues who doesn't really want to do that, because there's a lot of work to be done. But there does have to be the intermesh. So yes, we would normally start with, here's where we are, here's where we've come, these are the positive points of the program. but we would evaluate that here are some areas where we're lacking, and this is the way we intend to change them. And that's what this is supposed to be about.
Because I just get the feeling that there was a lot more negative being said than anything positive about
Well, it's always
where
that
we
way.
were, and that would be one of the things in a smaller, to get that out and to speak more in positive terms, or like somebody stated that several of the teachers, I guess, bent over backwards to be here more often and to do other things, and others weren't available, but maybe the point should just be that we'd like to see them more available, instead of kind of docking people for not being available. Just say that the student would like this interaction other than just the normal hours.
Well, this, you know, true. If we were dealing with this, a lot of this would fall under the school's monitoring devices and methods for ongoing self-evaluation, self-correction processes, which would be then, what do? We have meetings like this, people then make suggestions, and then we try to go through the correcting process. I guess it would be one way of we're dealing with this. You go into the whole set of issues down here, and there's a whole thing that says, you know, what is the student's role and what are the faculty's role? What are the faculty's rights and responsibilities in planning, development, and evaluation of the education plan and governance? And then what are the students' rights in this whole kind of a thing? And all, I mean, these are the same kinds of issues. If you decide you want us around, but we feel that within the system that we're dealing with and within the framework, we don't want that, then, you know, then you've got these funny, these dead-end issues. But I don't think we should get back to that again. I think it's really a question of, I mean, you know, you have a system, John has a system that's slightly different, and I think it's a question of let's decide how we're going to go about, you know, relating these.
Well, then what everyone's gonna, see, I don't even understand how students are participating in this, frankly. I see it as like 4 people sitting down, and, you know, it's a 3 solid day task of chunking out a report. I can't imagine how a group of people would do it. But I see it as a work task. I don't see it as too innovative of a process. It's a descriptive task of what we are.
I think that's sort of what I was.
There's not a lot to
saying.
come. I mean, it's just. Well,
it's
not too romantic of it.
I have an experience that we're doing this for the accreditation people. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, like, we could just give them a 10-page summary of where we are in our process of working these things out. And the real issue is where we are in the processes of working out these problems.
So let's just
and the report to them is a kind of a byproduct of that effort.
But even within that, John, it states here, you know, students, a program shall have policies and procedures compatible with those of the parent institution, if we had a parent, that specify students' rights and responsibilities. They shall encourage and provide opportunity for students to participate in the formulation of policy affecting academic and student affairs within the program. They're stating that that's intended and expected, that the student is not, you know, outside of that whole process. Make explicit the standards for the evaluation of the student's academic and skill performance and so forth as we can, so that there isn't any capricious or arbitrary manner. Afford students the right to organize in their own interests and matters concerning academic and student affairs. These are all issues related to students and how are they going to be carried out. These are certainly issues that I think, for one, students would specify how they would expect them to be handled, and within the role of the school, we would try to determine how we can best satisfy those. And I think that's, I mean, there's a whole set of issues there that as far as I'm concerned, students could spend, you know, next 2 weeks, 3 weeks among themselves even trying to sort those out. While some of us are trying to sort out curricular kinds of things, and other people who want to join in on curricular kinds of things from the student body and have specific attitudes to present can join in. I mean, you know, but I think but otherwise, I think, you know, if you try to get people who, you know, one person over here, he don't really care what the curriculum is about. He wants student rights, and we're trying to discuss curriculum, and he keeps saying, well, how do I get my student right every 5 minutes? And then you have to go through that whole explanation. It gets rather difficult. I mean, to me, that I find that very hard to manage, because you do have that separation. There are some people who really, you know, do separate things out and keep bringing up the same points over and over, and they keep being off in a different direction, where, you know, my personal desire and task might be, how do we better strengthen the program, and how are we going to manage the grad program, and how are we going to finance the whole thing? I mean, that might be the ones that I care about. And I care about the students, but that's easy. What do you want? We'll give it to you, kind of a thing. I mean, if we can, and if we're willing to pay for it, I don't see any. I don't see a problem there. All they have to do is specify what they think is important. So I don't, that's all I'm saying. I mean, so a whole set of those things fall into that category that are interpersonal and all that. Tom probably doesn't give a damn about that. I mean, because he sees, I don't know actually, but he might see, well, let's get this thrust going here. So all during that period, he's non-productive, or the next guy's non-productive, where we could be very productive by just switching the groups and where our tasks are.
Well, there's another one, Tom did.
Right, yeah. And we really have a month to get it over with.
Maybe one job is to define and write out, where we are at this date and where we've been and how we've come this far and what that is. And then another whole area is maybe where we're going. And maybe that's the creative and innovative part. And so maybe that's an area to go at, or maybe the people who have been around it to really get into to how we've gotten to where we are.
And where we think how we think we can improve. The other parts go into the whole innovative, and then we come together and see how we intermesh them. I mean, it's almost as simple as that to me. That because what we're trying to do is we're trying to run a school so far, unless we change that philosophy, which has enough structure for those who need structure, and enough community and non-structure for those, can deal so we can double work the whole community. Now, whether we continue that way or how we use them, is a question. We've tried to have an open system where students have a voice. We've tried to have as much personal choice as possible within the human beings that exist within the process. And because you don't have 100% one way or the other doesn't mean either one is any good. I mean, if the students feel that not 100% of the faculty want to interrelate on their issues, well, that's okay, because some of the faculty also feel that there aren't 100% of the students who want to deal with their particular issues either, and that's the way it's going to have to be. You'll never get 100% agreement in this size. Obviously it can't happen in this kind of group where everybody is satisfied that everybody loves him or her and is doing what they want him to do. Now, maybe John can work that out, but I can't work that out. So that's another whole set of issues. But I mean, that's another way just to deal with this, is that just we split up and come together and split up and come together, and instead of trying to do it in mass, which I think is very difficult, and those who want to get down to deal with a certain set of issues that are primarily curricular, we do that in budgetary, and another group does all the ones that deal with how do we still get as much creativeness into the program, as much for the student as they want to do in terms of how they want to interrelate in that whole other scene, and in what other parts that they put into the program. And then we'll just try to intermesh them. So that sort of goes back to what you said, the technical and the personal.
So you're seeing it as curricular and...
I just put them curricular or technical as you would put them, which does include the other, I'm not trying to ignore those other issues, but we're still not completely, totally clean on the linkages from year to year to year to year, and then how do we interrelate the other things. And I think there's some groups that could go through that linkage, and then there's another group that could go through all the alternative methods, and then the question is, how do we link all those together?
And that's all curricular, right? That's all.
I think, well,
you're putting all that in
you can put it all in curricular, but you also have to put it in this, what I'd call student community, or creative community, or I don't know, that whole scene of how the student interacts and how we look at the world in a broader sense, and all these kinds of issues that are very, very important, but are, we have to decide how we're going to incorporate those too. But we also have the studio linkages that are key, too, to the whole way that it works.
Okay. Well, something I see as important is that something that was mentioned is how that each faculty member represents, say, a different point of view, or not necessarily a different point of view, but another point of view. I think that that's fine, but there has to be some cohesiveness to that. And this goes along with your linkage thing about year to year, where maybe not a tight philosophy, but an overall philosophy of the school in a certain direction seems to be a hard thing to come up with when you're dealing with 30 different points of view, say, on the faculty level alone. It's hard to, So we're going to have a very diverse area of study that we want a direction to go. They seem very
Yeah, but see,
contradictory.
the things you're talking about then, I mean, just, like to me anyway, just total rhetoric, because you can discuss for hours and hours the necessity for cohesiveness, and yet you have to look at the existing people, and that's defined for itself. There's a reality to it that doesn't need you to describe it, complain about it. I mean, there's no reason to start philosophizing about it. It exists. You can talk
No,
about it.
I'm not trying
There's specific characters.
Okay, there are specific characters, but you're the problem.
We don't agree there needs to be. I don't agree with you.
The problem
that there should be continuity.
Automatically,
Automatically,
one
so.
of the things that's being dealt with in this is a continuity to a school that's heading in a certain direction. That, in other words, that's what they're questioning. Is this body capable of controlling itself in a manner that we feel?
That kind of continuity doesn't have to mean that the people agree
No,
with
they don't have to agree with each other, but when there is...
But there's necessarily even that many linkages. The continuity can be the fact that the six can work together and accept each other's differences, and lack of continuity.
But
that's just
they
as
have
valid.
to be able to work together. There has to be a unity to that group before that
I don't think there has to be. Because there's a lot of different people. In fact, I think it's just the opposite. If we have one of the uniquenesses here is the fact that there is a tremendous amount of diversity in the people here. And there isn't a lot of connections. A lot of us don't make a lot of connections in our work. Except we can respect the fact of working with these other people.
Well, I think that's
and allowing
fine
them
from
to
your
take
point of view, but from my point of view, where I'm here, I don't have all the answers. I'm groping. That's one reason I'm here. It's very confusing.
Yeah, but
what if we all gave you the wrong answer, which is what
No,
happens?
it's different people.
No, but that's what happens when you get a single idea in a school. It has one answer, and the answer quite often ends up being the wrong answer somewhere along the line, and then there's a whole change in the philosophy. Here you're being, I see a thread. I mean, maybe I'm the only one in the school who does. I don't know. But I see a linkage, and I see a thread, and I see differences in all the individuals. And I don't see great differences other than we're dealing in small issues. We don't have to all agree design-wise, but there are enough linkages to make it possible for a person to comprehend what they're going through if they want to do that. Now, if they, there are ways, and primarily they break down the way I look at them in terms of in one sense, methodology or design process methodology, which one goes through that kind of thing, versus the other, which really deals either with method or aesthetic attitude, and which is sort of the subjective part of it. And that's what architecture is about anyway. It's combinations of those two issues. Now, beyond that, where you go at the graduate level, where you go into your own searchings and so forth, and we're looking for stretched out kinds of things. That's something else again. But I think through the first groupings, I think we have that. Even though not everybody's going to agree, there's enough continuity that we can discuss certain issues together, as long as we understand each other in those things. And you have to do the same kind of thing. You have to sort those out as you go. And we're trying to help you sort them out in the way we do it.
Well, maybe a concrete example would be a little better than, for instance, I agree there has to be a lot down on the student's point as far as assimilating what is learned, but when you go out of second year, for instance, and your entire push up to that point has been towards, say, an organic way of solving a problem and examining the parts of the problem, examining how they fit together, and then all of a sudden you hit third year and there's a 180-degree march in the other direction as far as influence, which becomes very formal and stylistic and externally oriented, and I just, that transition right there alone there was no transition. It was like
point of order or something. Yeah, you're into the whole problem, your curricular area.
Right.
And we're trying to just work out at this point.
And that's one of the
format. I mean, that's an area for discussion.
Right.
Well, I thought maybe if I gave a concrete example, it would be more.
No, that's fine. That's good. But then you should sit in on our discussion that goes on as we start to try to define these things, because the question is, there's several ways to go. One way.
That's the point we never really get to.
But not hedging. You can deal with it if you want to. We could set up various formats. In one sense, you could have one linkage that, for all the time you're in school, it's a continuum of the thought processes and the interactions. Okay. And the other linkage can be this other linkage right straight up the line that deals with the formalistic attitudes towards what you're dealing with. Now, what we've been doing is kind of a skip-step method. The way I interpret it, Glenn would interpret it probably differently. But I see definite linkages from what Glenn does to what Eric does, even though they think they're completely different. I see the processes being almost identical. Okay, then Adi tries to make the linkage now, particularly to what I would call what Glassman is doing. Okay, then in third year, we've inserted another person besides Eric Moss, who you have a choice to take, who probably deals in a linkage much closer to what you had in second year. And if you choose Eric, you're choosing him for specific to learn a specific method of judgment. When you come to my year, then I try to synthesize all of them and ask everybody to start getting involved with their project. Okay, that's the linkage as I see it. Now that linkage could be, instead of that way, it could be one straight line where you only deal in one set of issues, or another straight line, or mixing. So that's what we have. That's some of the discussions that are going to have to go on in the curricular set, because we're not in total agreement on that. See, and some people would say one thing is more overemphasized than another. One thing might be visually more dominant than the other, but it isn't necessarily more the other way. And some people are more successful under one system than the other. I mean, not all students can go through the same system and understand it. So we've been trying to balance that, because we found, originally we thought, I mean, going back many years, we thought that process orientation was the only way we get rid of all the aesthetic judgments. Okay, that was, that's it obviously doesn't work in architecture. Architecture is a setup of many kinds of things, dealing with imagery, past history, all kinds of things. And there is no set way, unless you philosophically only believe in one thing. And that was when we set up originally the idea that if you like one guy and one person, and that's all you want to work with the whole time you're in school, you can do that. Nobody really opts for that. We had people who opted for that when we first started the school, but they haven't in recent years. But that's another thing we have to now, in other words, when you start to talk about creativity of the student involvement, we have to talk about also curricular-wise whether we're going to still deal with those options within the system if not enough people are using it that way. I don't know. And then I think we can intermesh and try to sort them out. But we want for those who really have strong feelings about this kind of linkage or non-linkage or attitude and all stuff, I think we want students to sit in on that. But those who are really interested in that aspect, from, in the way that we're going to talk about, those who want to talk about only the kind of the creative processes, what should be added to the school, what are we missing, how do we get to the outside, how is the student going to involve himself in that, and what is the process, and that's another set of issues really that are, I think, somewhat different. And then I, personally get very much involved in how you're going to also bring in the professional linkages and how you're going to bring in the other interdisciplines that haven't been, that aren't constantly here. So you have all of those issues, but those will come up in the curricular end, and the others will come up in student and faculty, school governing processes, which I think are.
I mean, it seems pretty. No. I mean, I just want to, get feedback there. That seems pretty much reaffirmed. I assume that's pretty much the way we're working on this.
Well, I don't know, unless somebody feels differently.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't really decided. For me, that would be fine. I don't know how you feel.
And then each person takes their choice, really, where they want to be.
Yeah, and I, personally, Tom's method of evaluating would seem to work out for both one.
Right. One city goes down this or sets the other. Right.
Like I said, everyone was to take different topics, and I think very, very important that everybody has a similar format.
Yeah, I think that's
there's never any connection to the groups.
I think that's vital.
But do we need more than those two group areas? Are there, then should they be, well, maybe the subgroups will have to have. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, there is the need for feedback, at periodic points along the line, just so that you don't come up with too radically things which don't intermesh at all.
Well,
obviously.
we should develop then a system, that we work one night one way, then when groups are sort of together, then they interrelate. I mean, it doesn't have to stay apart, but just to get off the ground, I think you have to start something really.
One question I have, because I don't understand, is why is there this super tight time limit? I mean, what is it?
We're going to be. You're supposed to have this in some kind of format for this initial visit, so that they can then evaluate something and understand what you're trying to do. Okay, we could say, well, screw it, here's our catalog, and that's what we stand for, but I don't believe that our catalog is still that accurate. Okay, and I don't think we also have a really hardline feeling on what the graduate program is totally, and we haven't really got a hardline feeling on how we interrelate other disciplines, and we haven't got, those have been in flux for 3 years.
Right.
And I think we have to set those up. Okay, then you say, here's what we intend to do, and they say, well, that looks pretty good all through here, but then there's this one item I don't think you're handling, and particularly if students are going to do such and such, how is it going to work?
They're coming through in a month. Is that?
Well, I don't know yet. We haven't got a date. See, I just said make it as late in November. Originally, I asked for it in the spring.
Yeah.
Okay. Then all of a sudden, while I was gone, I heard it was in the fall, and then I wrote back and said make it as late in November or early December as possible. So that gives us enough time to go through our process. But so my feeling is let's set October as the month we do it in, hoping that we'll finish by the end of November. But if we can get down to these issues, at least we have something for them to shoot at and understand.
Yeah, I just didn't know, exactly that they were coming that soon, and that
the other schools did theirs, but they kind of put together. Well, Stanley Obispo kind of put together kind of an old accreditation kind of a package, and there are a lot of little parts in this that we don't really have to work. I mean, some of the stuff is just administrative and budgetary, but they will become important as we develop the program, and we do those, I think, last, right? Because we have to decide these two issues, these major issues first, and then we input the others last. Thrust is of that. If the idea of how you can put it together is maybe a little hard, but I think we understand the thrust. And I think, of course, Bill's thing is he's one of the few students who's really asking for that part, which I think is really the biggest issue is how do you make that work in school, and then the other issue is how does everybody keep their personal freedom? I mean, there's nothing more important than personal freedom. How do you get that within a system? That's the world's political problem, right? How do you keep those two things in balance? And that's sort of what we're trying to do. What we'll try to do. So from my standpoint, I would, I just break us down according to where we want to work. Who wants to work where, and then you make it.
And then breakups of the two. So it could be
within maybe certain people.
What were they? Curriculum and community? Was that the two?
I guess if you want to, that's a way to call it. There was one would deal with, the kind of how do we make the linkages that Bill's asking about.
I guess what community would involve all the non-structured stuff, curriculum with all the structured stuff.
Community would be, all the other issues. How do you bring them in to the program? There'll be an overlap right away. I don't disagree. I mean, after a week or so, you're going to,
what establishes the direction of the school?
Pardon?
What establishes the direction of the school?
The prime direction?
Yeah,
I think
or a series of directions.
I think it comes out of whatever, comes out of the intermeshing of the two things. In other words, just because one group over here says this is what we think and the other groups think this, and then when you intermesh them, there's going to have to be some.
I'm not exactly the community now. What do you mean by?
What would be involved? Well, how do you develop personal freedoms and community kinds of things? I mean, that's one kind of, that's a whole set. How does one keep that within the school? How does a student constantly have his role or her role as an involved citizen in the community? And what should they return to the community for that role? And then what should be the kinds of things that should be brought in that aren't brought in the normal curriculum too? I mean, which some people might feel from that you right now say if we took our, like we were saying, if you took the curriculum as it exists and you look at it, maybe in that you don't feel that that's totally a community-oriented thing, including the curriculum. Maybe then one group starts to sort those out. I think we have to mesh again. I can't see it being separated, but it has to start.
If you'd ever accept the fact that the group would ever establish the goals, then that gets you into some more complex issues, because up till now we've been a fairly anarchistic, kind of amorphous kind of thing, which has a lot of validity because it allows us to respond. We never have to worry about where we're going. We just are what we are. It's a much more, what's the word, existentialist, maybe kind of direction. And then each year the group of people just become what the thing is. Well, once you set down a set of goals and they're going to say that the goals are oriented to the people, then I, for one, would never allow that. I wouldn't agree to that being validated past the end of that year. Because if the group decides on a goal, and the goal is only as good as the group that exists there, I mean, it gets to be pretty complex if you're really going to allow the group to set the goals in the school. It's very different than a small group of people establishing the goals, and it's been decided that the thing is centered a certain way for certain reasons. All right, and the students can accept it, or they can make choices of other schools. And the basic direction is established by some sort of a core group. But once it's done another way by the students, and it's actually controlled by the students, and then you're getting into a whole different thing.
It changes every year.
Because you couldn't say that's a goal for 5 years from now, because none of those students are there 5 years. It has absolutely no meaning at all.
I think that what you're saying there is a lot to be said for the student organized and run community, but dealing with this school on a realistic basis, I think that you're right, there has to be maybe it is anarchistic, but there has to be some sort of a direction that's beyond the person that's here from 1 to 4 years, In other words, when the people that were originally here the first year there are very few, if any, that are left this year, yet the school goes on, it has to be greater than the individuals that are part of the school.
It's just me like you want to define, what you call the pattern integrity. You want to have certain patterns, and you want to give them integrity in some kind of a form, so they'll go on, even though some of the people might change within the structure.
We don't want to make any defined, goals that are so limited, that new people that come in can't relate to. It's only going to be general things that basically are set because that's what makes the school what it is and makes the school better, and it makes it better itself.
Well, new people are going to relate to whatever's there. A new person's going to relate to whatever the existing is. He doesn't know.
Yeah, but with time, the interesting thing is that's usually true.
Glenn Small, the first day, the only thing I remember about anything that he said, he got up and he made some comment about the mic being, and the feeling that I got that this was some new restriction or it had taken away some intimacy. And I felt like I was in the middle of a very intimate group because the entire school was, right here. So the reality that I perceived the first day I get here, I don't think it's valid to worry about you people getting together and forming some restriction or some new rule, and then someone new coming in and going, oh, we don't want that, if they don't know what.
But we don't form rules. We just, as Tom says, I think the way the schools run, we evaluate, we try to better, we institute what we think is going to work better. If it doesn't, it's scrapped, and on we go. I mean, of course, I think that's a schooling process, and I think that's what most schools would like to be, personally. And I think we're if anything, that's our greatest strength. No other school can respond as quickly as we can to both the student community and what we don't think is working within the school, because we don't have the time lag that goes on in the normal university. So this is one of our assets. Okay, now some people don't like that, the idea that you're sort of amorphous in a sense. In other
But
words,
then they wouldn't want to come here then.
but I mean, even among the say, probably faculty group find that uncomfortable because in the long run, we don't have like the goal, either the goal to save the world up here, maybe as one way, or the goal to send the people into the practice of architecture, to tomorrow. So I mean, you have this whole kind of combination thing, which is could be subject to question at any point in time, and those goals could change slightly, but I don't know. I mean, so far we've been just.
I don't see this radically different from where we started out of just deciding what is relevant as of today and setting your goals according to that and reevaluating each year or 3 years
Except
later.
we try to give it a 3-year plan or a 4-year plan so we can at least understand where we think we may want to go. But say tomorrow how we may set down a grad program that we think will work, and then we go through 1 year of it and we find it doesn't work. So we've got to readjust that if it's not really making any sense within our system. Just as you've been here, you've seen what the adjustments have been. And one day somebody comes up and says, "Gee, that's great. What's going on? I really like." And then a year later, I don't think it's so good anymore. I like to, well, that's the way it should be. I think, because Tom Main isn't dealing in the same issues that when he first walked into here 3 years ago that he is today totally either. I mean, 100%. And neither am I, and neither is Ina, and neither is maybe Glenn is. I don't know.
I don't think so.
He's the most static one, but he's a static. But I'm not sure. I don't think any of us are that static as personalities, so we do change our points of view. As we change our points of view,
begin with, so
as we change our points of view, you can have certain changes.
I mean, so I don't find this out of character. I don't find us locking ourselves in by doing this process.
Neither do I.
Why don't we, instead of just all this rhetoric, can we go over each one?
Well, I don't think we have to do that tonight. No, I think that all we really try and do is set up the plan of the task.
Yeah.
Okay, and so why don't we just on what I'd rather see is we meet back here Wednesday evening, and if we can have a potluck dinner, even better, and then break down into the groups who want to talk about certain things, and we'll, if you're satisfied with your format or you want to think it over, anybody else wants to do it prior to getting together Wednesday night, we probably should define whatever terms there are, and each group works within a certain format or agenda, right? And those who are interested work for several hours, so we see where we go. And then we'll move back on, then we'll maybe assign some writing for people to do so that we can make it better, and then next Monday meet again, and we'll sort of start the ball rolling. And when one group feels the other group wants to, I'm sorry.
I'm not clear on how we're going to have our format developed, out of where that's going to come for Wednesday's meeting.
Well, so far everybody said, why don't we use Tom's 4-point format, and these 2 points of what issues are going to be dealt with, and start there for the moment and leave it there tonight, because I guess that's as close as we come to agreement. If somebody, like say if in the next 2 days you decide you don't like something very strongly, then let's hear it before the Wednesday night so we can sort it out and change it. And then if more groups, then once you get into your group, if that group breaks down, then it's up to the group to break it down.
So we're gonna, whoever figures out which of these, we have 2 groups here, basically, we have the curriculum and the community. So these performance criteria are sort of gonna break down each criteria is gonna either go to one group or the other, right? And then we'll break these down the same way, and each group will have a set of performance criteria and a whole bunch of issues that we've already talked about, right? And then we'll discuss them.
Well, I mean, one group may deal with particularly proposed processes for the development of the students' capabilities, problem recognition, problem formulation, problem resolution. That's a curricular item. The one over here, though, that deals in the school's monitoring devices and so forth, fall back into the interpersonal thing to me. I mean, so in some ways we could even sort out some of the criteria.
That's what I think.
Want to do that into those 2 areas, and then so some people deal with some issues and some with the other.
I would think that given those 2 cover all topics, that once the people decided which group they would like to be in, from there maybe it can be the first responsibility of that group to decide what is going to be covered by that group.
Which of these
Break
issues?
down again.
All right. Because some cases maybe both will want to cover
It'd be
more.
interesting, what, like this, say take this group, how many would be interested in curriculum and how many would be interested
This one
in
here?
community, yeah.
Yeah. Well, curricular, I would be interested in that. So 4, and then we have, the rest are interpersonal or the community part?
Yeah.
Either one.
It goes both ways.
But I think there are a lot of people who left who might be more interested in the community than they were in the other, so I hope. And if not, if the group ends up this small, then we don't even have to break down.
I've always wondered, maybe when these
certain
meetings,
issues.
whoever, if you
I mean,
take one or someone takes one, just, we could put up a note that what the topic's gonna
Well,
be.
just we're meeting again Wednesday night, and these are the topic areas, let's do it that way.
Yeah,
And
we'll
then,
promote it on Wednesday so everybody
So
knows
people,
about
other
it.
people
And if we
will
have a
wanna come.
potluck, let's have a real potluck like we used to have.
Oh, what's the phony one?
Well, I mean, when everybody brings something and we have a big table that
So everybody coming to
a community
Yeah.
thing, yeah. The other one's easier, but it doesn't have the spirit somehow of participation.
but let's, why don't we do that and then
About
just break into it and see where.
Well,
Yeah,
meeting.
yeah, because if it gradually gets down to where it's
Someone
10
listens to the
people,
word.
then we can just meet together and sort them out together. There's no problem there. It's just when it's really hard to deal with, you know, because everybody always goes off in different directions, and it's just so. I
It's
can never.
impossible unless it's Robert's rules with a speaker standing up there telling who can talk and who can't.
That doesn't even.
I'm always
that's
amazed that you
fun.
guys want to do this stuff.
Sure, you're really getting to be
And
an
why do any of you
organization
guys
man.
want to spend Wednesday night doing this? Why wouldn't you rather work on your design project? It's so boring, it's unbelievable, it's amazing to me.
And stay home.
I mean, if somebody twists my arm, right? So you know it has to be done, like this curriculum thing has to be out because it's a necessity of it.
Well, it's
Why
has
make
to be
it
out in really
my way?
No, I'm just curious. I find it really boring.
But some people don't, though. Some people enjoy the political processes and the involvement processes.
Do you want to shine
You want give? You have your 4 issues you had down. What do you have? That's a copy.
I have Ina's notes, right?
Well, why don't we, before everybody splits, maybe have
Take copies of this and Tom's.
and Tom. Why don't you do? Tom set his up and.
Copies of what, Sean?
Well, one.
Tom had a list of 4 points.
Ina
and we have a
copied that
list
off
of
the
what was
board,
there.
so everybody who wants those to mull over it. Okay.
Are there more copies of that implementation?
This thing here?
I was gonna make a copy of that Jerry off the one that's on the board, I might as well just make 2.
Okay, make a couple.
Implementation, parentheses, how to.
Well, you're gonna take that one down and make a copy, then put it back up again? You can make a few for anybody who wants them.
Tom's 4 points right here.
I think we did.
Well, we did 4 of them.
But that's all right, but that's, we knew